No one tells you this. When you date a woman who has a child, you're not just falling in love with her. You're stepping into the life of a child who isn't yours. You don't get to raise them your way. You're not allowed to change anything. You can't complain if the ex shows up every weekend. But you're expected to accept it all and be grateful you were allowed in. You're supposed to pay for meals, buy birthday gifts, play the role of the good man, but you get no say in how that child is raised. You can't teach, but you're judged if you're not patient enough. You don't choose the schedule, but you're blamed if you're not flexible. And worse, you're not the priority. Every time you feel hurt, you have to swallow it. She's been through a lot. Every time you want to speak up, you're weighed down by the unspoken duty. A real man is supposed to be understanding, but has anyone asked what you see? Does anyone really care that you've given up so much of yourself just to hold on to someone who was already broken? This isn't a moral lecture. This is a wake-up call. Have you ever loved a woman with a child? One word: worth it or not? Leave your answer. And if you saw yourself in what you just heard, stay until the end of the video. It'll all make sense. You once dated a woman with a child. At first, you didn't think too much. You told yourself that loving someone means loving their whole journey. You were ready. You were mature. You thought you could accept everything. But then you started noticing the little things, bit by bit, things you could no longer ignore. She told you you could meet on Saturday, but by Friday afternoon, she texted her child had a fever. Postponed. She promised to make it up next week. But when the day came, her ex had something come up. She had to watch the kid again. Rescheduled. Incomplete dates. Rushed calls. Conversations cut short by a "mommy" from the next room. You didn't complain. You understood. But you started to feel like someone not in the plan. Just slotted in when there was a gap. And then, there were times you felt invisible. Not because she didn't love you, but because that love was always divided. A part for her child. A part for her old family. A part for a past you could never touch. And you, with all your sincerity and effort, were left with whatever remained. Shift to another moment. She comes to see you. Exhausted. Eyes hollow. You ask what's wrong. She says it's nothing. But you know it's about her kid. About the ex. About the pressure that hasn't let up. And you can't help. You're not in that circle. You're just the backup support. And when you try to ask for something just for the two of you, she says, "You have to understand. My child comes first." Oh, you nod. On the outside, it looks like acceptance, but inside, a quiet space starts to grow. Because you begin to understand, you will never be first on her list of priorities. You can't be the center, not because you're not good enough, but simply because you came later. It's that simple. You tell yourself it makes sense. That being a mother is sacred. That selfishness isn't an option. And your mind understands, but your heart doesn't. The heart doesn't like being second. The heart isn't good at enduring being put off. And then you start asking yourself, if you're never the priority, if everything you want always has to adjust to someone else, are you building a relationship or just trying to survive one? Because in the end, love isn't silent acceptance. Love needs presence, needs to be seen, needs to be cared for as something irreplaceable. And if you're always the afterthought, in every feeling, in every decision, in every choice, then where do you truly stand in her life? And are you sure you're okay with that? Or are you just pretending to be okay because you're afraid of being judged as not understanding enough? You start playing the role of the good man, not because anyone made you, but because you truly wanted to do the right thing. You pick up and drop off. You pay. You teach that child how to tie their shoes, how to be polite, how to keep promises. You try to show up as part of their life, even though you know you came later. But the deeper you go, the more you see a paradox you can't ignore. You carry the responsibility of a father, but none of the rights. You're not allowed to say no. if the child disrespects you, because they're not used to you yet. N. You don't get to decide when to be strict and when to be gentle, because they're not your kid. N. You can't offer input on parenting, but if you stay on the sidelines too long, you're seen as distant. You can't express how you truly feel, because immediately you'll be labeled cold-hearted, unloving toward children, insensitive to a woman who's been through pain. You live in a role where expectations always exceed realistic limits. People expect you to act like a grown man, compassionate, open-armed, to what was never yours. But they don't ask if you're ready. They don't ask if you even want to play that role. They assume that if you love, you must take the whole package. No questions asked. And you assume you should. Because if you refuse, you feel guilty. If you don't help with homework, you feel irresponsible. If you don't pay for a birthday, you feel stingy. But the truth is, you're not the father. You were never asked if you even wanted to be one. You were just placed in that position and expected to do it well. Have you ever paused and asked yourself, is this love? Or is this a nameless sacrifice for a script already written? Are you truly building a relationship where two people choose each other, lay a foundation together, share something new together? Or are you just filling a vacancy, replacing someone who once stood there? The unfairness isn't in the child. It isn't in the woman. It's in the fact that you don't dare admit you're not okay, that you're tired, that you don't want to carry a responsibility you didn't create. But because you're a man, you stay silent. Because you want to be seen as mature, as kind, you don't allow yourself to step back. But being kind doesn't mean losing yourself. Being mature doesn't mean blindly taking on burdens. And love doesn't mean forcing yourself into a role you never chose. So be honest with yourself. Are you building real love, or just trying to play your part in a story that was never meant for you? You're not just loving a woman. You're loving her past, even though you never agreed to step into it. There are things left unsaid, but you feel them clearly every day. The silent presence of another man, someone who once called her wife, once lived in the home you now walk into, once held the child you now have to call his. And he's no longer here, but he never really left. His name still shows up in calls. Schedules still revolve around his visitation days. Every big or small decision in your little family has to be run by the child's father. And you, the one who came after, aren't allowed to question, not allowed to be jealous, not allowed to feel uncomfortable, because if you react, you're seen as immature. You feel that presence not just physically, it exists in her eyes when she recalls old memories, in the way she tells stories of what she once did with her ex-husband, as if they're an inseparable part of her narrative. In the bedroom where you sleep, the closet was picked by him. On the kitchen shelf, there's still an item he once bought, somewhere inside. You feel like you're just renting space in an emotional room that was never fully cleared. You don't want to control her. You don't want to erase her past, but you can't keep living in the gray. You don't know if you're being compared, but it feels that way. With every action you take, you wonder, is she seeing me as less, or just trying to accept me because the old one is gone? Worse, you can't speak up, because you'll be judged as petty, told to be understanding, told that, for the child's sake, they have to stay in contact. But does anyone understand you when you have to bury your real emotions just so you don't break something that was already cracked? You're not competing with the ex, but you're not allowed to stand beside him either. You're excluded from what matters, yet expected to show up as if you're the one building it all. You're not the third person, but you were never the first. And when you can't speak, can't contribute, can't change things, you begin to shrink. You start to pull back. You still love, but you're afraid to move deeper, because every step closer to her feels like stepping into the shadow of another man, a man who's no longer here, but still present in every decision. So ask yourself honestly, If your place is always behind someone no longer there, where do you truly stand? And this thing you call love, is there even enough space for you to really live in it? You're not the biological father, but if you live long enough with the child's mother, wake up together enough nights, attend enough parent-teacher meetings, and have your name on enough bills, then in the eyes of the law, you might be seen as a father. Even if you didn't give birth to the child, even if you never signed a single document, as long as you were there long enough, consistently enough, responsibility might come for you, even after love has already left. This isn't a scare tactic. This is reality already happening in many places. In some countries, laws on common law or de facto relationships to allow courts to see you as financially responsible for the child, simply because you once lived with the mother, once played the role of stepdad, which means when love ends, you don't just walk away empty-handed. You might walk away with the duty to support a child who doesn't carry your blood and no longer calls you anything at all. There have been men taken to court. They resisted. They explained. They said they were just the boyfriend, and that they didn't know the law. But the law doesn't care, because feelings aren't legal grounds. Your presence, especially as a stepfather, is the very thing that can be used against you. Even if you were just filling a gap, even if you were only trying to be a good man, you think it won't happen to you? That it doesn't apply in your country? But are you sure the law will be on your side when the relationship falls apart? When it becomes a matter of who was more involved? Oh, who acted like a parent? Oh, who paid the bills? Where do you think you'll stand? Worse yet, you can't get those years back. You can't reclaim the money you spent. You can't erase the nights you stayed up caring for a sick child, a child who later won't even remember you. And in that moment, you have nothing to protect yourself with, but a single sentence. I just wanted to help. But kindness doesn't get credited. It gets counted as debt. And then you'll understand something few ever say out loud. Men aren't just at risk emotionally. They're at risk legally, especially when they love too hard, trust too much, and stay too silent. So ask yourself seriously, if tomorrow she walks away, and the child no longer calls you anything, can you be sure you won't still be paying the price? For a relationship you were never protected in from the start, you tell others that you love her, that you're not afraid of her past, not afraid of her child, not afraid of the nameless role in a family that was never yours. But when night falls, when no one else is there to see, you start to wonder, are you staying because of love, or just because you're afraid to leave? Because deep down, you know very well, what keeps you isn't really emotion. It's a form of responsibility, wrapped in something called kindness. You care for her because she's been hurt. You care for the child because they're innocent. You don't want to become the next man who walks away, and so you stay. Not because your heart still burns, but because you don't want to become someone who did her wrong. But staying out of fear of hurting others is also the fastest way to hurt yourself. You begin to live like an emotional hero, forcing yourself to be tolerant of everything, staying silent when you're disrespected, being patient when you're not met halfway, sacrificing when no one asked you to. And with each passing day, you're no longer yourself. You're a version that's trimmed your feelings, shrunk your desires, and hidden all your personal boundaries just to keep this relationship from collapsing. You tell yourself it's maturity. Oh, but in truth, it's just a disguised form of insecurity. You're afraid you won't find anyone else, afraid that if you let go, you'll be alone forever, afraid that no one will accept you the way she does. So you accept everything, even the feeling of being unseen, unprioritized, and unloved the way you deserve. Then one day, you wake up and feel completely drained, not because she did anything wrong, but because you've spent too long in a relationship where you couldn't be honest with yourself. And the real question isn't, do you still love her? It's, if you walked away today, would you feel guilty, or would you feel free? If it's guilt, maybe you loved deeply enough, but if it's freedom, then maybe that love has long become a burden. Wrapped in two words, obligation and loyalty, you enter a relationship. But it's not like the ones before. This time, the story had already begun long before you arrived. The main characters were already cast. The plot was already in motion. Conflicts had happened. Tears had been shed. There are even chapters you'll never get to read, yet you're forced to live with their consequences. You don't get to write the first chapter. You don't get to choose the supporting characters. You don't decide the emotional flow, but you have to take part. You have to be present. You have to try to understand. And worst of all, you have to carry the scars of a story you didn't create. She once loved deeply. She once broke. She once told herself never to trust a man again. Then you appeared, hoping to start something new. But what you received wasn't a blank page. It was a half-written journal, full of smudged ink and crossed-out lines, a place where every word you say could easily be mistaken for echoes of the past, where one small misstep is enough to make her shrink back, defensive, already assuming you'll hurt her like the one before. You feel lost. You don't know where to begin. You don't know what to touch, when to stay silent, how much to show, because every reaction she gives is not just about you. It's about memory, memories of someone who let her down, who made her stand strong for her child, who left her living in doubt. And you, even without fault, are still made to carry the weight of that broken trust. You're not allowed to ask too much, not allowed to be upset for too long, not allowed to expect too highly, because you came later. You need to understand. But does anyone understand you? That you're also human, that you also have feelings, that you also deserve to be seen, not as someone patching old wounds, but as someone trying to build something new. This is no longer about right or wrong. It's a question of fairness. When you love someone who's been through a lot, you have to be strong. You have to be grounded, but even strength has limits. When you're living in a story you were never part of from the start, yet are expected to carry the ending. And maybe the hardest part isn't loving her. It's loving with enough compassion, enough patience, enough clarity, to not lose yourself in a journey that was never yours to begin with. So ask yourself again, are you strong enough to live inside a story that's not your own? And if the answer is no, do you dare walk away before you forget that you came here to start a new chapter? It's not because you hate women with children. It's not because you look down on those who have been through heartbreak. It's not because you're selfish or lack compassion. It's simply that you've started to love yourself enough to realize some relationships, no matter how well-intentioned, no longer align with the path you're on. You once thought you could carry it. Once believed that if you were kind enough, mature enough, everything would be okay. But then you learned a costly lesson. Love doesn't always overcome structural imbalance. When you're the one who comes in late to a story already full of characters, you have to fight every day just to hold on to a place no one can promise is yours. And you don't want to have to ask for permission to love. Don't want to keep reminding yourself to be understanding. Don't want to trade away personal freedom, emotional boundaries, and your own limits, just to be seen as a good man in someone else's eyes. Walking away from such a relationship doesn't mean you're weak or immature. On the contrary, it's a sign of someone clear-headed enough to avoid vague roles, unwanted performances, and silent expectations. Others hope you'll fulfill without question. You have the right to choose what brings you peace, the right to say no to things that cost you too much without giving balance in return, the right to protect the healthiest parts of yourself for something more deserving. And what about the woman on the other side of the story? Can a single mother love again and build a fair, clear relationship without placing invisible expectations on the man entering her life? That's absolutely possible, but it doesn't come from kindness alone. It comes from clarity, from resetting the structure, from the ability to see the new man as a partner, not a replacement. Because in the end, love can't start from pity, nor can it last through gratitude. It can only exist If both people enter with open hands, not carrying the weight of the past, not imposing roles from old chapters, not hiding real feelings behind justifications, and you, a man standing at the edge of a decision, might be misunderstood for walking away, might be called unbrave. But you know deep down, sometimes, real courage is knowing when to say no before you're pulled into a role that no longer resembles who you are. So be honest. If you're a man, will you choose to enter this kind of relationship or not? And if you're a woman, what do you expect from a man who steps into your world and your child's? Leave your truest answer, because real conversations begin not with judgment, but with the courage to speak your mind